So, folks, I am really, really excited. Don't want to take any more time, but really excited to bring to you a really good friend, but beyond that, an amazing guy, former provost of Concordia Seminary in St. Louis, and now the chief curatorial officer of the Museum of the Bible, Dr. Jeff Kloha. Jeff, thanks for taking the time to do this. It's awesome.
Hey, hi everybody. Great to sort of see you again. Known Bill and Zach for a long time. We've been to Concordia several times, and welcome to Museum of the Bible.
Awesome.
So, Jeff, you're going to walk us through some different parts of the museum and take questions, as we mentioned, so people can text or put questions in the chat or in the comments, whether it's Facebook or online. Anything else we should know to get started?
I'll get rolling. Good.
All right.
So a little bit about Museum of the Bible. We've been open here in Washington, D.C. for about 2.5 years now, and had great response. A lot of people turning out until about 10 weeks ago. So we've been closed, obviously, but we still have a few people on site taking care of the artifacts and getting things ready for reopening, doing some IT kind of things. So I want to make sure to say thanks to Matthew Tucker, who's doing the camera work today. He heads up our living history interpreters, which are the characters who populate Nazareth Village on our stories floor. But here, today, we're going to be on the history of the Bible floor. And what this floor shows is, well, just that, the history of the Bible from its ancient Near Eastern backgrounds to the earliest copies in the Dead Sea Scrolls and the papyri, all down through the ages to the Reformation, the King James period, and then past where I am, down into the modern day and modern translations and the ongoing work of translations in the world today. So I can't possibly show you 250,000 square feet of exhibits in 28 minutes. I can't even show you the whole history floor. But I thought I'd start with the King James because that's a kind of an easy reference point that many of you are probably familiar with. And the King James is where we have finally the Bible as we kind of know it, as a printed single book with basically the same English, same phraseology that we use in our Bibles today. So, the Lord is my shepherd, and blessed are the meek. All that goes back to the King James in its final form in 1611. And we have here in our exhibit, I should have said, you're going to see a little behind the scenes because we are starting to get some of the artifacts back remounted in preparation for opening here, hopefully in the next several weeks. And it's a very complicated, careful process. So you're going to see some carts, some sticky tape so our registrars know what they did and keep track of things. But I'll show you quick two of the earliest King James Bibles. When the King James was printed in 1611, it was printed in this very large format. The printer, Robert Barker, had to have a license from the king to print the Bible. And here, in this case on the left, is the first edition of the King James 1611. Very rare to have a first edition, especially in complete form like that with its original binding. We also have over here on the right, the second edition, which was printed in the same year in 1611, but there's a single letter difference. One letter is different between the first and second edition. There's a passage in Ruth chapter 3 where, it's the story of Ruth and Boaz and they're, finding their way together. And in one of the passages, one of the verses that ends with, he went into the city or she went into the city. And the Hebrew is a little bit unclear. It could actually be translated either way. And the first edition translated it or used the word he went into the city. The second edition, they realized it was probably a mistake, and so they reprinted it with the she went into the city. So you might see a reference to that in the 1611 Bibles, the he Bible and the she Bible. But you can see both here in the museum and see the one letter that is different between these two first editions. So So pretty cool here. And of course, the King James is hugely important for the history of the English Bible, and even went on to influence translations into other languages that, because English was so popular, it became a foundation for a lot of different translations. I'm going to start walking you through about, 1,200 years of history at this point. And we'll do it a little slowly. I'll point a couple things out, but I want to get us back to the papyri and scroll manuscripts that are the earliest known copies of the Bible in their original languages, in Greek and in Hebrew. And so we're going to go back, pointing out a few things from here, and then we'll get back to those early papyri, which is something I actually know about. Most of the stuff I just make up otherwise, but here's what it is. So we're going to go, hopefully not too quickly. This is the Reformation period when printing becomes really popular. So now we're about 100 years prior to the King James. Think 1500s, 1510, 1520. Martin Luther, of course, 1517, 95 Theses. He's also very famous for his translation of the Bible into German. The New Testament was done in 1522. That's over there. And the entire Bible he finished in 1534, which is right over there. We also have a little bit on William Tyndale over here. The first English translation from the Greek, which he did in 1525. And beautiful translation. Unfortunately, it was not received well by King Henry VIII, who was still Catholic at that point, and ended up having Tyndale murdered for doing the translation. So he's considered a martyr of the faith. Stepping back over here, we're going to go back another 50 years and get to Johann Gutenberg. And we have two pieces of Gutenberg here. This is a one page, which we're keeping covered right now. And then next to it over here is a Gutenberg Bible, not a first edition. There's only just a handful of those in the world. Fortunately, we don't have one at our museum, but we do have one from just a couple of years later. Same printer, same format. Just to show you quickly, this is 1452. Beautiful manuscript printed on vellum, leather. It's in amazing condition. If you notice up top here, there's a chain attached to it. Back in the Middle Ages, books were so rare and valuable that they would be chained to the shelves so people would not walk off with them. So it's kind of the security system, and it's pretty cool. We still have it on this copy of the Gutenberg Bible here. Even though it's printed now and they could produce Bibles a lot more quickly, they're still very expensive in Gutenberg's day. And the cost of a Gutenberg Bible was about the same as the cost of a nice house in Amsterdam at that time. So you could either buy a Bible or buy a house. It was something that was really owned by wealthy people at that point. And it wasn't until they refined paper printing and the ink process that they could explode the printing. And then you get to Luther's day and Tyndale and greater access to the Bible. All right, so I've got a question here, and I'll kind of keep walking a little bit past just amazing books, but you can see we still have some things covered, and we're just getting some things opened here, but got a question about how the museum came into existence, and why do we choose this as the location? Well, the basic mission of the museum is to get into the public space and invite everyone to engage with the Bible. Is our mission. So we want to present the Bible's history and the basic stories of the Bible and the impact of the Bible in America and around the world in a manner that's accessible to people of all faith traditions or no faith tradition, and help people just understand how important this book has been, for thousands of years, literally. We, the founders of the museum actually were looking at two different locations, either New York or Washington, D.C., because, again, we wanted to have as much of the public coming to the museum as possible. And in the United States, either New York or Washington is where you have the the largest and the most important museums. So back in the early 2010s, they were looking for property actually both in New York and in Washington. And this property became available. Fabulous location. We're literally a 5-minute walk from the Air and Space Museum. There's a metro stop, a subway right underneath our building. The U.S. Capitol is about a 6-minute walk away. So we're right in the heart of Washington, D.C. And it's great to see so many people from so many different backgrounds all over the world coming to the museum. It's also a lot of fun because there is such an international audience. And I was kind of surprised by this because, you know, obviously all nations have an embassy in Washington. It's very common to have embassies from around the world bringing groups over to the museum for special tours, to learn more about the Bible, kind of the cultural impact. And we're very well known as being one of the most modern and technologically advanced museums. So it's kind of a cool museum to see anyway. So it's kind of been an added bonus to have that worldwide impact that we get from being here in Washington, D.C. Question about the Gutenberg Bible. Good question. Does it have the same books that we have in our Bibles today? Well, this depends if you're Lutheran or Catholic or something else. So the Bible text in the Gutenberg Bible is the Latin Vulgate text, which is the translation used by the church, by the Catholic Church, from the time of Jerome, who we passed back over there in the late 4th century, down to the time of the Reformation, and to some extent even today. And that Latin Vulgate text includes books that are not included in Protestant Bibles. So Lutheran or Methodist or Presbyterian or Anglican or, you know, Pentecostal, whatever. They have fewer books, primarily because with the Reformation, there was an emphasis to go back to the original sources, to the earliest sources. And so they relied on the books that were clearly from the Greek and the Hebrew and used by the earliest both Christian communities as well as Jewish communities. So the Reformers focused on the 66 books that are found in the traditional Protestant canon. The Catholic Church included books that had been translated into Greek and then later into Latin, which were a bit later than what we find in the Hebrew Bible in the Old Testament. And so that's what Gutenberg has in his Bible. So the Gutenberg Bible would have the contents basically of what you would have in a Roman Catholic Bible today. And I can show you one of those later on if we get to it. Where did we get the KJV prints? It's a great question. And I should know off the top of my head, but I believe the first edition one was acquired from a private collector who had it in their family for quite some time. So that one wasn't from an auction house or something like that. I think the second edition might have been on the market. But I think the first one came from a private collector. They're obviously quite rare. And what happens, you maybe have this in your own family. Someone gets very interested in a topic, they like to collect things, and they amass a beautiful, amazing collection of all kinds of great stuff. And then they pass away and their kids aren't as interested and don't really want the stuff. So they end up, you know, wanting to let other people enjoy those things. And that's one way that we've acquired quite a large number of our artifacts, especially printed books. We actually just acquired a very large collection of 14,000 rare books, focusing on the post-Reformation period, Bible in medicine, Bible in politics, all kinds of great stuff from a collector in Louisville. And we just finished that transaction about 5 months ago. And so we're halfway finished bringing it, and then the COVID hit. Well, we'll talk about that some other time. Let's keep going back to the papyri. And I'm going to have to get my light out here because we don't have these lit up. One thing we do with our, especially papyrus manuscripts and anything vellum, anything leather, is we keep them as dark as possible because light will darken the material. And so we track very carefully the brightness inside the cases, how many hours these are on each day. And so we keep them dark unless they're on view. And even when they're on view, they're still very light. But these are some of the earliest examples of copies of the New Testament. The New Testament writings were originally copied on a material called papyrus, which is actually very similar to, man, you want to take a look here, very similar to paper, except a little bit thicker. It's kind of made out of, papyrus plant sliced very thin and stretched out and laid together, and then the writing is applied by a scribe. And this only survives in places like Egypt. A little bit has survived in Pompeii and Herculaneum, where it was covered by the volcanic eruptions. But basically, all the papyrus documents are preserved in Egypt. And so it gives us a really important glimpse of what the biblical text looked like back in its earliest phase. Now, this one is of a manuscript of, it's about half of the Gospel of Luke, second half, and then the first half of the Gospel of John. And it happens to be this one is a replica, I have to say, but it's the oldest known, fairly complete copy of the New Testament Gospels. And you can see pretty clearly, you might not be able to read Greek, but you could at least make the letters out. It's a professional scribe. It's very well written. The letters are the same size. The margins are very clear. It's a very nice copy produced by what is probably a professional scribe. And your modern translations today are essentially translations of those Greek words on your page. Now, this is considered one of the most reliable manuscripts from the earliest period of the New Testament. The one we have over here is a real one. This is ours. And this is a piece of John chapter 8. And it happens to be the earliest piece of John chapter 8 in existence. As you can see, it's damaged. It's about a third of the page. And the letters on this manuscript are very large, you notice, in format. So Hemera, and it's John chapter 8. Udina, you can make it out pretty easily. This particular copy, because of the format and the lettering, was likely used for public reading. That is, the scribe produced this with these large letters in an easily readable format so that someone in a community setting, a worship setting, could read out loud from it rather than a personal copy. I'll show you what a personal copy would look like. Let's see, here's the book of James. Very similar, obviously Greek, but you notice how much smaller the letters are. It's not as carefully formed, a little bit of connecting between the letters. So this one is probably made for private use, private study, rather than corporate worship. What the early manuscripts tell us, first of all, aside from the wording of the New Testament text, which of course is very important, but also how they formed the New Testament together. The earliest copies have, again, because papyrus is a relatively thick material, you can only get so many pages together into a book before it gets too thick. So they produced essentially, really two books in the New Testament, or two sets of books. The four Gospels were one book, and the Acts and the Pauline epistles were another book. And so the earliest manuscripts of the New Testament down through the 4th century will either be the four Gospels or the Pauline epistles, or occasionally a book just by itself. So the book of James over there is just a copied by itself. You don't yet have, you might say, the technology because of the material to produce a Bible where all the books are collected under one cover. I'll show you one more here, which is kind of cool. It's a damaged one, but it's the earliest piece of Romans, actually. It's called the Wyman fragment, and you can see it's pretty heavily damaged. But this contains Romans chapter 5 and has, again, some pretty important wording for our modern translations. This one is actually on parchment rather than papyrus. It dates a little bit later. It's probably early 4th century. And then I'll show you one more really quick before we get to the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I got some time. Here, this will probably look very similar to the Luke manuscript I showed you earlier. This is our copy of the Greek Psalter, so the Book of Psalms translated into Greek. The translation of the Greek probably occurred from Hebrew into Greek, probably starting about 200 BC, about 200 years before Jesus. And that probably started with the Pentateuch, with Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and the Psalms was probably done pretty early. The rest of the books were probably finished by the time of Jesus. But the Jewish community in Alexandria, Egypt, felt that they needed to have the Hebrew translated into Greek for use locally. And this is the earliest copy of a Greek translation of the Psalms. And as you can tell, it's just a beautiful manuscript. The lettering is gorgeous. It's in phenomenal condition. And it's just a delight to read. This was published by scholars about 60 years ago. What year are we in? 2020, about 70 years ago. It was published. But some new things have come to light, and so we're producing a new academic edition of this manuscript here. There's a project where we're sponsoring at Cambridge to produce a new edition. So that's been going on for about 5 years, and my patience is wearing thin, but they'll get it done at some point. That's how academics work. So that's the papyri, and again, these are incredibly important for understanding the wording of the Greek text down through the ages until you get to translations like Luther. And remarkably, the texts we have from the 2nd, 3rd century, I mean, again, if you know Greek, you can just lay it down and read it straight through, and it's what we have today in the editions that pastors use and seminary students use for their studies today. So there's it's great to show the remarkable consistency, excuse me, that we have from the earliest manuscripts down to the present day. And it's really awesome to be able to show that here. You got some more stuff over here, more stuff over there, more stuff over there. I'll take a pause. If you want to ask any questions about the papyri. Oh, okay, good, here's one. Do we know what was used for ink on the papyrus? Yes. So it's actually very simple. And fortunately for us, they used very simple ingredients because, well, they basically burned either papyrus or maybe just charcoal, ground it up with some oil and water mixture, and then applied that to the papyrus. So very simple ingredients. And because there are no mineral compounds or like iron or something like that, it doesn't do any damage to the papyrus. So it essentially melds into the papyrus, and that's why we can still read it today. When you get to manuscripts from the 6th, 7th, 8th centuries and they're writing on parchment, on leather, they start to use, again, some iron in the ink to make it a darker color. And once you introduce minerals, it tends to eat through the vellum. So some of the manuscripts you'll see, if they didn't mix it up well, will actually have the letters eaten through the manuscript. But again, because they use very simple technology and what was at hand, fortunately, it preserves the lettering just perfectly for us to read today. Well, let's hop over to the Dead Sea Scrolls. And what we have on display, I'll just show you this kind of little section here. These are all replicas, but they're a good way to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls themselves. Unfortunately, our lights are off in the cases, so you have to kind of track along here. What you're looking at right now is a replica of what's called the Great Isaiah Scroll. These scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls, were discovered beginning in 1947 in the Dead Sea area, which is south of Jerusalem, and found in caves hidden most likely during the Jewish revolt, when the Jewish, especially the Judean population, revolted against Rome. And Rome, of course, doesn't like revolts, so they send an army, and doesn't turn out well for the people in Jerusalem. And they took a bunch of manuscripts and hid them in clay jars. We have a replica here, and hid them in these caves. And they were either forgotten about or lost, or the people who hid them perished in the wars. And so these were discovered, by chance in the 1940s, and then further excavations into the 1950s. And these now give us the oldest available Hebrew text of the Old Testament. Some of these date back to 200 years before the time of Jesus. So incredibly important, because at the time these were discovered, the oldest Hebrew manuscripts that we had access to were about 1,000 years old. And we have one of those. I could have shown you, but anyway, it's a beautiful manuscript. But these were now 1,000, 1,200 years older than the manuscripts that we had, just 70 years ago. So a remarkable discovery. And again, much like the papyri, what this discovery showed was, by and large, the wording in the Hebrew Bibles used today, in our modern translations today, is the same wording. And the Great Isaiah Scroll is just a fantastically beautiful manuscript. You can see very well written. It's obviously a professional scribe. The script is just a gorgeous script. The columns are all perfect. You can see the seams where, it's in 4 columns, and then the pieces sewn together 3 columns, and then the pieces sewn together to form the scroll. What we have on display here is only about 8 chapters. If you go to the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem to see the Dead Sea Scrolls, well, I hate to tell you, you're going to see about the same thing, because they don't put the originals on display. They're just too fragile to put on display. So they also have replicas on display, except for a couple of cases. But they have the entire Great Isaiah Scroll replica on display. We also show some other things. This is kind of an interesting, strange text. About 1/3 of the scrolls found in the Dead Sea discoveries were biblical manuscripts. Others were theological writings, or almost like sermons, you might say, teachings. This particular scroll is called the Copper Scroll, and it's on obviously copper plates, and then stamped letters, and it contains basically a treasure map with millions and millions of dollars worth of gold and jewels and silver and all kinds of precious things. And of course, this set of all people off wondering if they should go look for this treasure. They never found anything, and scholars think that this was kind of like in the Book of Revelation, right, where the New Jerusalem is made of precious jewels, jasper and carnelian and that kind of thing. It's probably a similar kind of text where they're describing an end times kingdom where God reigns with these riches. So it's probably that kind of text. But again, we have all kinds of cool stuff. Here's a bit of a commentary on Isaiah, again on a scroll. So you can kind of see what these look like. And they give us a really great glimpse into the earliest forms, the earliest wording of the Old Testament. For the Old Testament books in Qumran, in the Dead Sea area, they found every book except Esther. So copies of every book except Esther. And Esther has always been a bit of in the Jewish community, a bit of a question mark as to whether it's really part of the Bible or not, mostly because it doesn't contain the name of God. But all the other books are represented in the scrolls, which is pretty cool. Looks like we're about out of time.
We are, Jeff.
All right.
Wow, what an amazing job. Now, having been to the Museum of the Bible and seen some of this with you, you haven't even scratched the surface.
No, it's I just kind of ramble on for 20 minutes.
And it's an amazing place. I wonder if maybe you would be kind enough to join us again sometime in the future, because the feedback from the folks that have been watching is just, they're absolutely amazed. There's also a YouTube channel, isn't there, where there's more?
Yeah, I'll point you to one thing. We have a YouTube channel. If you go to our webpage, actually, with the shutdown, we had a crazy idea to go and make these little fun videos, about 5-6 minutes on different things in the museum. We call it Lonesome Curator. And if you go to our webpage, I think we have about 40 of these now. A lot of fun. Matthew Tucker, my friend here, is in a bunch of those, and I'm in a few. And we talk about, Gutenberg, and we talk about papyri, and we talk about, a lot of the manuscripts here. It's not quite the museum experience. It's just kind of a fun thing to, help people know a little bit more about the history of the Bible. But that's a resource on our webpage, and I'd love to have you take a look at that. But yeah, I'd love to join you again sometime and show you more of the museum.
Awesome. Museumofthebible.org. And Dr. Kloha, we can't wait to have you back at Concordia sometime in the near future when all of this is letting everybody travel again.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. It'd be great to see you all again.
So thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Zach, TJ, for making all of this work. And folks, I hope you enjoy this. We'll try to get Dr. Kloha back on again sometime in the near future. Have a great Memorial Day weekend, and God bless you.